Okay, everyone, let's get started. So my name's Janet Rothney. I'm a health sciences librarian at the University of Manitoba. We're going to talk about EndNote basics today. And there should be a link in the chat to a folder with the slides, but also some handouts that we'll use for practicing if you're going to practice along live with us, which is optional. Welcome, but optional. All right, let's get started. Oh, and as we go through, I just want to mention that we do record the sessions. They go on our University of Manitoba Library's YouTube page. There isn't any way for a viewer to see who's attending, so it's just me that needs to be concerned about that kind of thing. And usually I'll send a note that the recording's up once it's processed. Because we're sharing the slides through Google, I'm not going to send the handouts and everything like that by email, so just grab them out of that Google folder, and I won't take it down anytime soon. So objectives for this session, we have a couple. So we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of using EndNote as a citation management tool. We're going to talk about creating an EndNote library and organizing it using groups and shared libraries. Shared libraries we might talk about a little later on. We'll compare and contrast the different ways to import material into EndNote, and we'll talk a little bit about using the MS Word plugin for citing and writing. And I should mention also that Malin is also on the line, so if you have questions along the way, especially technology questions, which definitely will come up in EndNote sessions, she's here to help. So the questions box is on the right-hand side in your dashboard. Okay, so because this is a basic session, we're starting off pretty easy. So why would we use a citation manager? There's three good reasons. So collecting and maintaining your references all in one place is useful. Even if you don't write a lot of papers or cite a lot of articles, having a place that you can search by author names or topics can be really valuable, especially if you're planning to use that material over time. So if you're at kind of a grad level or a faculty PhD kind of level, you know your domain and you'll probably refer to those papers over and over again. So it's useful to collect them rather than just a big messy PDF folder in your Dropbox. Speaking from experience. The second big reason, and often the reason that people come to citation management, is to be able to format in-text citation and reference lists in a more manageable way. So you can, essentially what you'll do is once you've collected everything into your library, you will use the program to generate citations of many different styles. So something like an alphabetical style like APA with Rothney 2021, in the in-text citation, to a numbered style where you cite the first paper that you cite as reference 1, and so on. And then the third big reason, and this is reason enough on its own regardless of the other two issues, if you plan to or feel like you may need to move between citation styles, a citation manager is pretty essential for that job. So I will often write in an APA kind of style where I have my author names in my text, because that's sort of how I think of the references that I'm using. But in my field, mostly our citation styles are numbered. So I will flip back and forth from writing to submitting. It's also quite common to, if you're, say, writing a thesis, then you may submit part of that or reformat part of that into a paper submission, and it's very likely that those two documents will require different citation styles. So having the ability to move back and forth can be really powerful. What is EndNote? Fairly basic question. So EndNote is one of our three University of Manitoba Library supported tools. We also support Mendeley and Zotero. And there's a comparison chart. There's a link in that slide for a comparison chart between the three. So if you haven't chosen one yet, or if you're kind of shopping through all 3 of the sessions, that's a great method just to come and see what they look like. But you may also want to look at some specifics between the 3. EndNote is the most robust tool that we work with. It's designed for deep use, so many references, lots of manipulation is what EndNote excels at. So it is the most complex tool we support. It is the industry standard for systematic review work, which we not going to touch on a whole lot today, but if that's kind of the path you're taking, this is one of the reasons to be in EndNote versus something else. It easily holds thousands of references and offers the most granular control of output. So what I mean by that is different ways that you can format your citations, and also using your citations within your library. So putting them into different kinds of groups and sharing and deduplicating, all of those kinds of things. You just have more options within EndNote. And EndNote is the only program that we support, like doing training and things like that, that is a paid product. So there is a discount in the University of Manitoba bookstore. There's a slightly different price for students versus faculty, but everyone gets a discount compared to the web price if you just went to endnote.com. So it's worth it coming through the U of M. It's a digital download, so you don't have to come to campus or anything like that. God forbid these days. And it's something that it's a program that lives on your computer, on your so once you buy the product code, you have the ability to load it onto 3 devices, Mac or Windows. And generally the programs will last a number of years. So I'm using X9. That's what we're going to look at today. X8 is still very much active, and version 20 just came out a couple months and weeks ago, depending on if you're Windows or Mac. So they're all kind of in play, and that's about a range of 8 years. So even though you have to buy it once, you don't have to like buy another whole new version next year. So let's do a little poll. So help me kind of figure out where you are at and go faster or slower in certain sections of the workshop. So I'm going to launch a poll that is in GoTo, and it's going to take over your screen. So if you are not in full screen, you may need to look for the poll. It sometimes gets hidden behind the windows. But it's just asking how familiar you are with EndNote, and there's no wrong answer at all. So give me some info if you have a minute. If you're not, if you're washing dishes or walking your dog or whatever, that's also fine. I'll close the poll in a few, maybe 10, 15 more seconds. Okay. So lots of shopping around, which is great. A few have purchased your tool, but you're just starting to use it. Perfect timing. And then being a new user with lots of questions is also great. So I will mention we are, there's a couple other sessions that might work for you, especially if you are that new user, lots of questions category. So there's an EndNote advanced session. I forgot to look up the date coming up. There's also a video of it in our YouTube files. And there's an EndNote drop-in session, which is, I believe it's next week. It's the 24th. Yeah, a week from today. That might be a nice, so you can do a few more things between now and then. And then if you have more specific questions, or if you want someone to kind of walk through your specific use, that might be a really nice session to block off. And I think it's at noon. The details are at the end of the slideshow. Okay, thank you for the poll. So let's get in there. I'm going to be moving back and forth a fair bit. So once I do that, I'm going to turn off my camera because EndNote is kind of small and you might want to zoom your screen a little bit. Before we start, I'm using a Mac. and I'm using X9, which I mentioned already. Mac and Windows have the same functionality, but they do look quite different. So if you're working in a Windows environment, you may have to look in different places for your menu than where I'm pointing my cursors, but everything should be available in both places, and I've used it in both places. So there's nothing that I can think of that's not available on one or the other. And as I mentioned, version 20 just came out late in the fall for Windows and just early in the new year for Mac. So I have it, I've been playing around with it, but I'm not totally familiar with it. So I'm going to use X9 again today. For the most part, it's a cosmetic change, so it's more colorful and some of the icons are bigger. It's a little easier to navigate, which is great because EndNote does look a little aged in X9, which you'll see. There's a few more deduplicating options. So if you are in that knowledge synthesis or systematic searching vein, you have a couple more choices to choose which fields to compare against. And there's some improvements in PDF viewing. Those are the big things that I can see and that they're kind of promoting as changes. But everything else kind of applies to what we're talking about. So the first thing you want to do when you build an EndNote library is to, when you install EndNote onto your computer, is to create a library. I'm going to turn off my camera and I'll show you my EndNote now, which involves me changing my screen. So just hold tight. Okay, so you're now looking at my EndNote library, and I can't zoom the text in EndNote. So if you can't see everything and you want to be able to see a little bit more, in the GoToMeeting menu, you should be able to zoom within the Windows option. Or if you have your own EndNote, you can look at that rather than just follow along with my words. So if you've never used, if you've never used EndNote, the first thing you're going to want to do is go to File, New, and create a library. If this is your very first library, it will be automatically called My EndNote Library, which is what the one I'm using is called because it's just my default one that I use for teaching. You have to make a choice fairly early on. You can use one library for all of your work, and that is really helpful if you plan to work within a team of colleagues and you want to share your library across that, or if you plan to sync to the web fairly frequently. So if you're working on an older device and you're concerned about, maybe your hard drive crashing or something like that, you may want to only use one library so that you can sync it and share it. One of the nice options within EndNote is that you can use multiple libraries. So this usually has more libraries in it, but I only have a couple right now on my machine. And so I use that because as a librarian, I work with lots of projects that I spend a lot of time with for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and then I put them away. The researchers take over and I move on, right? So I like having those discrete libraries so that they are their own universe. Just think about how you prefer to work and how similar your projects are and whether you would reuse documents from one project to the next. Those kinds of things would maybe be useful to consider. So you can have multiple libraries. You don't have to if you don't want to. You can also organize with groups, which are these little purple folders on the left-hand side, which we're going to talk about in a minute. When you're looking on your computer, you'll see, so now we're in my documents folder, and you can see that when I've made a library, I also get a folder called, whatever the library is called, .data, and you want to keep those two files together. if you're creating a new one, you can also, there's an option to save it as a package, which is not a terrible idea. EndNote needs both files to work properly. So they want to live in the same area of your computer. So I keep mine in my documents because I don't really keep anything else in there. And they also, EndNote will recommend that you don't house all of your EndNote work on a cloud device like Dropbox or Google Drive, things like that. And we have had some people who are fine using cloud storage and some people who are not. So, you know, if something goes funky and you are using cloud storage for your EndNote files, that may be something that's happening to you. Once you've got your library set up, yours won't have anything in it necessarily yet, but there's sort of a couple different panes that are quite common. So on the left-hand side, I have all my details about how many references I have. So this says all references 98, anything that's recently added, anything that's unfiled, anything that's been put into my trash and I haven't removed it since the last time. And then I've got some groups here, which are like folders, collections, lots of different words for those kinds of things. And then at the bottom, I have some groups shared by others, which we'll talk about a little later on. In the middle pane, I have the details of the citations that I'm working with, and I can move these panes around so I can make them bigger or smaller. So this is showing me that I have a few papers that have attachments. So they have a little paperclip icon next to them. I've got them, things can be sorted by author or year or title. And then I've got a number of other details. In this top menu bar, if I right click it, I can make some choices about which details show up on my screen and in which order. So I don't usually use the read unread status, which is just these little buttons, radio buttons, but I could, and I can also move those columns over. So you can really customize how your library looks based on what information is important to you, which is really nice because some of the other tools, you don't have that much control and you just sort of have to adapt, right? In the third pane, moving from left to right, I have, if I've highlighted an article, I can see the details of that paper in here. And if I've brought an abstract with me from the database or any other notes, it should be in here with me. And on the very right-hand side, if I'm working with a PDF, an article with a PDF, I will see that PDF on the right-hand side. And usually, I'll have to like make that pane quite a bit bigger to be able to read it, right? And that's one of the things that's slightly different in version 20. Okay. There's also two kinds of sets of menus. So that in the top gray bar, but not in my menu bar, I've got some icons, and if you hover over them, they will give you a description of what they should do. And then everything is basically duplicated in the top menus. So file, edit, references, groups, and tools. Okay. So are there any questions, Malin, before we zoom along?
Nope, no questions as of yet.
Great. All right. So let's talk about importing content. So there's three main ways to do this. You can import PDFs or groups of PDFs. So if you, especially when you're early in your EndNote experience, you probably have a collection that you want to sort and organize. So importing those PDFs as a group is really handy. You don't have to go back and find them in your favorite database. And you can annotate and search PDFs within EndNote. So if you do that a fair bit already in another program, you may choose to stay there, or you can move everything over into EndNote and it can be kind of your reading and note-taking and citing home. The middle option, an RIS import, is the one I do the most, partly because of the way I work. So I mostly gather information for other people, although I do obviously pull my own research as well. So I don't necessarily need PDFs for everything that I'm pulling. And it is a way to bring in volume. So if I'm often bringing in hundreds of papers at a time, or even 15 or something, it's much quicker to bring it in as an RIS import than it is to go and find each PDF and pull them. So that's also kind of dependent on your workflow. If you don't select papers until you've read through the PDF, then you may choose to stick with importing PDFs. I find that most people will prefer one or the other of those modes as their main importing option. So either you end up with a library that is mostly PDFs, or you end up with a library that is not that many PDFs. And that's just kind of personal preference. And then the third option is you can search within EndNote, and I'll show you how to do it. I do have a major caveat about it. I prefer for this searching to be done for things that are known to you. So if you're writing along and you realize you forgot to bring in one of your important papers, then you need to just, what it is, it exists in your favorite database, and you just haven't picked it up yet for some reason, then this is a nice quick way to find it quickly. But I mean, partly it's just me as a librarian, it's a much simpler search interface than most databases themselves. And you don't have a lot of browsing options or ability to kind of see what else is available to you in your questions. So let's do an example of each of these. And this is where you'll use some of those handouts. So in the folder, there's a couple PDFs and an RIS file for you to play around with, so you can follow along on your own computer if you are ready to do that and sitting at your device and all of those kinds of things. So we'll go back into my EndNote. And the first thing I'm going to do is go into the File menu and click Import. So it's going to show me something about my computer here. I'm going to go into my Downloads folder. Wait, where's that? Where are those papers? So you have the Dennis 2013 and you have Oliver 2016. So I'm going to click on the one that I want to bring in. And before I click Import, I need to click on this Options menu, which is really easy to miss, especially in the Mac interface. So with Windows, this menu is always kind of open. You have to select the correct import option. So because this is a PDF, I'm going to click it. I'm going to import it as a PDF. You can see there's lots of other options for importing. If you do this wrong, once you import something, it will either just be like a blank reference, or if you were supposed to have more than one thing, it'll just have one big reference with everything kind of jammed in it. So I'm expecting to bring in one. In my imported references menu on the left-hand side, I can see one reference, and I can click through and see that this is the thing I was planning to bring in. That was easy, right? So if you have multiple PDFs, you can bring in multiple if you choose. And again, this is the kind of thing that you probably will do more early on when you're building your library rather than over time, or some people kind of do it as a batch. So they'll collect PDFs on their desktop, for example, and then spend an hour on a Friday afternoon when they're kind of brain dead, cleaning up things, right? And filing them away and making sure they're in their EndNote in their proper groups. Let's try an RIS import, slightly more complex. So you have one in that folder. I do want to show you what it looks like to pull an RIS file. So this happens in any database. I'm going to use Scopus because it's a nice big broad database, but also something that I actually use. I guess I haven't signed in today. That seems unusual. So I'm going to do a quick search on cycling. Bicycling, not chemistry cycling. And I'm going to pick a couple things. And then I would either add them to my list and keep building my folder, or I'll look for an export option in my database. So I'm going to click export, and in this place I can choose to bring the citation information and all these other details. So I usually try and bring the citation and the abstract. And I want to bring it in as an RIS format. That's kind of a standardized format that most databases have as an option, and it's easily read across multiple tools. So it just goes into my downloads folder, and I don't usually rename them. So you can see that this one's called Scopus 14. The one in the folder handout is Scopus 13. And then I'll go to my EndNote and do another import. Go into my downloads this time and pick up that RIS file. Again, I'm going to change my import option to RIS. And this is something that is a little bit, feels a little herky-jerky in a session like this, but in real life, because you'll probably prefer one or the other, you won't have to change your import options all that often. It's just if you were doing something unusual. So EndNote remembers the most recent import option that you've done and just leaves it there. So if I'm always importing RIS files, it's more likely that my next one will also be a RIS. And now I have 3 new references. You can see I don't have any paper clips here. I don't have any PDFs attached, but I do have the 3 references that I took out are the ones that came in. So usually I just kind of mentally compare the numbers so that it is a match. So hopefully that worked for you. Let us know in the questions or comments. And then the third way to bring stuff in is this searching through EndNote. So in my upper hand menu here, I'm going to click on the globe, which is called the online search mode. And I have a couple of different options of places that I can search. You can also click more to see if your favorite database is in this list. I'm going to use PubMed as an example. Usually I pull a PMID and I totally forgot. So I'm going to search for helmets in the title of my paper. So I can change all of these search fields. If you're a PubMed user or you use a database that has a specific kind of ID number for their articles, that's something that I use quite frequently because it's something that I know about, right? And I'm going to pick something from 2020, and then I'll click search. So then you'll get this message here. It says found 19 references, and you can ask for it to retrieve those numbers 1 through 19, or you can change that number. So if you found like 1,000 references, you might only want to bring in the first 100, right? If you're searching for a known item, it's more likely that you have a short list. Even this list is longer than I would normally use. And you're probably just looking for something that you will visually recognize. So maybe it was this Leslie paper. Like, oh, right, that's the one I needed. I couldn't remember the author name. Here it is. The last stage of pulling a reference from the online search is that you have to then copy it over to your personal library. So just because it's in this format that looks like your own EndNote, it doesn't actually translate into your own library where you can come and refer back to it tomorrow until you save it in the library that you want it in. So I've right-clicked on the paper that I want, this Leslie paper. I'm going to click on the copy references to option, and I'm going to use my EndNote library, which is the one that the demo library that we've been using. I could, if I'm using multiple libraries, choose a different one if I want. And then I'll go back up in this top menu here, just where the globe is, the folder icon goes back to my personal library. So that's getting content in. And you should be able to now see, you should have a couple things in there at least, probably not 100 like I've got, but hopefully a few.
Hey Janet, just wondering, do you want to just talk a little bit about, so you showed PubMed, which is a freely accessible resource, but about the other databases that are listed there in that list for searching?
Sure. So in the online search window, I've got these, a couple automatic choices. So Library of Congress, Lista, PubMed, and Web of Science. These are ones that are kind of promoted by EndNote. Web of Science and EndNote are owned by the same group of people. PubMed is there because I found it in the list. So if I click on more, I can search through all of these. So some of these are library catalogs from universities. And some of them are databases like PsycInfo, Scopus, EBSCO, those kinds of places. So if you aren't seeing the place that you want to search in, you can look for it and see if it's in the list. They do have to kind of have an agreement to be searched, and some places will require you to authenticate, which is a little touch and go with EndNote, I would say. Would you agree, Malin?
Yes, I would agree. I would say, I mean, I asked the question for somebody else, but my experience is that it never works that well just because of the way that our system works. So PubMed works really well for known articles, but I would say for those other ones like CINAHL or PsycInfo, it might say, oh, ask for a password from your library, but it is never going to connect that nicely or at all. It will be, I find, mostly just a headache. So it's better to use the databases themselves, and then you get so much more like how you can create much better searches in the databases themselves rather than in EndNote.
Absolutely. Yep. So here I've just tried a University of Manitoba search and it seems to be working, but I did just re-up my authentication for University of Manitoba, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But I agree with Malin. So this works really well when you're working with a database that has a free version or a free interface. So PubMed does that because then it doesn't have to go through any other additional channels to log you in. So give it a try with your favorite database. If it doesn't work, that may be one of the problems. And like we're both saying, you're really losing a lot of features, right? This is a very simple search. So good in a pinch, not a great thing to start relying on. Okay, where are we here? So now that we've got a couple things in our database, let's talk about organizing it. So we're at this slide now, organize content. So we're going to use some groups to make sense of our list. So once you get past sort of one screen's worth of data, it can be a little overwhelming to process that information, to find what you need. So groups are very common to collect, and especially if you're using one library for lots of different projects, you would likely pull things together based on the project, right? So that you can then look at your 10 references for X, Y, and Z paper. So let's come back to my EndNote, and I'm going to turn my camera off again. So Right now I'm in my all references list. So I have 102 papers. Hopefully you have at least a couple. So you've tried maybe two PDFs or a PDF on one of the RIS files, or you have something in there from before. And you can collect things. This is how I usually make a group. So I will come through this list and identify things. So I've highlighted them. And now I'm going to right click and I'm going to add my references to a group. You can also use the groups menu at the top of your screen if you are more of a menu person rather than a right click person. So once you've got a couple of things selected, you can create a group. It goes into your left-hand menu here, and it's always just called new group. So it's really helpful to rename it as soon as possible. Again, that's a right click once you've got it highlighted. And you can call it whatever you like. Sometimes I'll call them something based on like the time of year that I'm working on it or the project, something like that. And then I can see that I've got 3 papers. These papers can live in multiple groups if you choose. So if the Shirkin paper is relevant for a couple different projects, that's fine. It's not an issue to have them in both places. That's really, making a group isn't that hard. So you can create a group from the top menu as well, and you can rename a group from the top menu. You can also see here, so some people, once they start using groups, they don't like having anything that isn't in a group. So then you can look at your unfiled material and sort it out into the rest of your groups if you choose. But you can also always look at your all references, which can be really useful, especially if you can't remember where you may have put something, being able to see your all references. And if you are not an organizing person, which sometimes I am that person, you can search across your whole library in the top right-hand corner here. And you can change this menu to searching in any field or a specific field. So if you're looking for an author, maybe, and you don't know which group you're in, this is again something like if you have hundreds of references, because usually what I'll do when I'm searching for something is I'll just resort this list so that I can, find the Wardlaw paper or find the Tellis paper. But there's lots of different ways to organize content and also to find it, locate it as well. In the groups menu, there's also an option here for smart groups. These are groups that get automatically built based on some parameters. So if you want to collect things by a certain author all in one group, or if you want to collect things by time, say, so this might be useful for, if you're working on a COVID project and you want to collect the work that is from 2020 or all of the other coronavirus material that's from before 2020, you can create a smart group here. So you make a name, you put in your parameters, and it will give you a new smart group. And it will continue to pull those 2020 papers into that smart group as well. So I don't often use smart groups, but they do seem like a great idea. It sort of depends on how you use your library over time, I think. Any other questions about organizing, or Malin, do you have any clever ideas for how you organize your EndNote?
I just use folder or groups and subgroups too, but I'm not a big smart group folder, but I know some people really like them. I just had a question, so maybe the whole group might be interested about whether you can move a subgroup from one set of groups to another.
Yes. Yes, you can. So you just grab, how do I do this? Create from groups, rename. Normally I just drag and drop these things. Why can't I? Okay, here I can take it from this place to that place, from Franca to my groups. So it might be that these are already nested, which I find a little hard to see in EndNote. Some of our other software tools, you can see the nesting, they do it sort of visually, whereas these ones are not as obvious when they're nested. Does that answer your question, or should I keep poking around?
I will report back on, oh yeah, she said perfect.
Okay, yeah, basically you just grab the group and try and move it where you want to take it. The one thing that you can't really manipulate is if you are working with shared libraries. So at the bottom of my screen here, I have a couple libraries that belong to other people that I can see. And those ones I don't necessarily have control over, and they have to live at the bottom of my screen. So those are a little bit different. Okay, holy moly, the time is just whipping along here. So editing references, this is a common need. You shouldn't have to spend as much time editing as if you were doing manual referencing, but there is some things that you want to pay attention to. So especially if you're working with PDF imports, it's common that not all their metadata may be completely correct, especially if you're working with something that's older. So you do want to double check. And when you do make edits, it's helpful to do it in your library rather than in your document so that the next time you cite it, it's still fixed. So let's come back to my EndNote. So I've resorted my list and I can see I have a couple papers here that don't have an author at all. So I'm probably going to have to find some information there. So they're really obvious to see because they have like a blank, a whole section is blank. There's also, okay, so I did this one just so that I could show you how to do this. So this Olivier paper, I took out the title. The editing is really helpful when you have, it's really easy to do when you have PDFs because the PDF is just in that second pane. So you can compare the two windows, the two right-hand windows, and make edits. And you can see in this, the pane that I'm working on my cursor, once I click onto a section, I can type into that. So I'm going to put in bicycle injuries. I'm not going to type the whole thing because that'll take me forever. And then once I click out, EndNote is going to ask me to save the reference. So some people do this every time they bring something in. Some people do it only when they're writing and they realize that their citation isn't working. But it's quite common to need to do a few little edits every once in a while. Sometimes things happen, like the journal name will come in a bit funky, or it's very common for authors to be kind of mishandled in the metadata. So you may need to make some adjustments there. You can see in the top of this pane that most of the papers that I have here are journal articles. But if for some reason you have like a report or a book, what might have happened is when you bring it in, it's not matching. So if you brought in a book and it's being treated as a journal article, it's going to have some weird fields in it, right? So you may need to just change the citation type and then fill in, say, your publisher information, for example. This is also how you would create a manual reference. So in references, you have the option to make a new reference, and essentially you'll use one of those templates and fill in as much information as you have. So if you have like a book in your office and you don't know where it came from, or you don't have it in a database, you may be just looking at it as a physical item and putting in those references manually. Simple to do, important to remember that it's not, EndNote may not get everything right. All right, citing and writing. So this is an exciting reason. This is a lot of the times the reason that someone comes to EndNote or comes to a citation tool is because they just hate writing and citing. So let's look at how this works with EndNote and Word. When you install EndNote on your computer, it will automatically generate a new piece in your Word doc, a new menu. So let me just get everything pulled up and then I will show you my Word doc. Okay, so I have EndNote up here in my menu bar, X9. If you have a whole bunch of menus or if you have a small screen, you may need to scroll over to the right. It's Wednesday, which I keep having to remind myself because of our nice little holiday earlier this week. So you'll just write along as you normally would within Word. And once you're ready, you'll click the biggest icon on the menu bar on the left-hand side that says Insert Citation. And this will talk to your library and you can pull up citations. Why is this not working? There we go. Okay, so it's pulled up this is the menu for looking for papers, and you can search in your libraries or you can search in your shared groups. So if you're working within a shared project, you may need to flip over to that other section. You can put in pretty much anything into this menu. So you can search by, usually I use author names or maybe the sort of crux of the paper. And I'll click Insert. And my menu style is set to APA 7th. So it automatically formatted me an in-text citation and then a reference list entry right underneath. And you can see when I click on the in-text citation, it's gray. And it's just a helpful reminder that this is essentially just a piece of code that EndNote has input into your Word document that is linked to the in-text and the reference list. So they kind of rely on each other. So if you then took out the et al from Amadori, it will break that link and you won't be able to edit it later. So you do want to keep that material kind of intact. But I can write ahead of it or change things. If I'm working within a numbered style, it will automatically change the numbering, which is super nice. That's something that's the least fun in numbered styles. Apparently this is just a lot to take for my computer. Just having a little think here. There we go. You can insert more than one citation in a sentence, and you can also edit your citations. Oh my God. Once they're in there. So in alphabetical style, sometimes you want to suppress the author, or you may want to add a page number, for example. So you can do that in this edit and manage citations option. So I can exclude the author, exclude the year, show only in bibliography, all of those kinds of things. There's also a link here to edit the reference in the library. So if I notice that this Beaumont paper isn't coming up correctly, I can easily flip over, and then it's a helpful reminder to like change it in my library, not on my paper. So that's essentially, oh, and then changing the citation style. So I mentioned I'm using APA 7th as my automatic. I'm going to change it to Vancouver style, which is a numbered style. And then I can also show you how it will change the numbering once I update. Pretty nice. There's a couple other menus on here. I don't use a whole lot of this. You can always Google any of these other features or just poke around. But essentially that's all you need to do. Insert citation, find it in your library, throw it into your document. Okay, we're getting near the end here, guys. So I have a couple things that we could talk about. I do want to make sure that we have time for questions. So if you're just sitting here and listening to me, you can try searching to find a known item. So use that globe feature in your EndNote to search for something that you know about. So if you've been published, search for yourself as an author. You can try importing another PDF. So the 2 PDF examples that I sent are clean. They come with citations that work well. That's not always the case. The ones I find are the trickiest are older documentation and also some PDFs that are published by smaller groups, so like associations or something that might not have a bunch of money to clean their metadata really nicely. You can also, if you've done your PDF and a RIS import, you can kind of compare your results, or you can spend some time organizing your library. And I will show find full text for PDFs while I'm listening for Maylin with any questions.
Yes, there are a few about in Word. So one of them was how you might add how you'd add more than one reference at a time.
Sure.
And then how the kind of the bibliography, like, so you've got your bibliography kind of, it shows up right there. So maybe just kind of showing that you can keep on typing text and that will stay at the bottom. And the third question was about adding page numbers if needed.
Sure. Okay. So let's add another citation to this first sentence. Very eloquent sentence. Hi, it's Wednesday. I'm going to click Insert Citation again. We're going to wait a second for my computer to talk to EndNote. I will mention too, if you've started a Word doc and your EndNote isn't open, it will wake up the EndNote file as well. So you kind of have them both open at the same time. And I'm going to add this Clark paper in there. So now I've got 1,2. If I was working with an APA style, it would show both authors, Midori and Clark. So pretty easy to just keep adding. So if you are looking in the Insert Citation menu and you have more than one, you can pick, I think you can pick a couple, right? So I've just highlighted them both from that menu. And I can keep on doing that if I want. For this, let's add a page number for Beaumont. So I've got it highlighted and I'm going to use the Edit and Manage Citations menu, which is just to the right of Insert Citation. And it's showing me the paper that I have highlighted. I'm going to click on this format. Oh no, this is how I exclude an author or a year. If I want to add a page number, I will just put it in this bottom pages. And it will automatically add it in the appropriate section in your in-text citation. So that's really dependent on your citation style, right? And then the bibliography, I think we kind of showed this. You can also turn off instant formatting. So my computer is showing you a little bit of a blip while it's reconfiguring everything. You can turn that off if you're making a ton of changes, or if you are working with an older machine and you're having trouble kind of keeping up. And then you would just want to use this Update Citations and Configure Bibliography button a little more frequently if you have your instant formatting off. And then depending on your citation style, you'll probably want to put in a title and usually a page break, right, for your reference list. But they keep it here so that you can kind of see quickly if something is being formatted improperly, which I find very helpful. Other questions?
I think the only, sorry if you guys heard me, I thought I had mute on when I was talking to my son. Can you show the page numbers? Oh, you did show it. Sorry, I missed that. Yeah, I think that addressed all the questions that I had in the chat.
Okay, awesome. So I mentioned this a couple times just while we were walking through things, that if you're using a RIS format to import, you can also locate PDFs later on. This is something that is imperfect. You will not get a 100% retrieval rate, but it is something that EndNote does at least partly, whereas the other citation tools do not. So if I have, I'm going to pick a small group here. If I have a group, I can use this tool. Where is the menu? I can never find this one. You can highlight them. There's also, it's above in one of those menus. I just can't find it right now. You can click Find Full Text. Again, this is the kind of thing that, okay, so my authentication is set up right now, which is going to try and retrieve stuff from our university catalog as well, which I find it kind of, it works and then it dies and then I have to set it up again and then it'll work again. So I don't find it all that helpful, honestly. What this is really good for is pulling up open access papers that are easily found on the web and then just bringing it in and connecting it to your citation. So while I'm doing this Find Full Text, I get a new menu in my left-hand side and it's telling me which ones it's found. So it found one as a PDF and it found one as a URL. The URL is more common if you're using your U of M link. And the process for adding an authentication, I'm gonna send a link through the chat. Oh, there you go, Maylin's got it, for how to do it. It's a couple different pieces of code. Yeah, so finding full text can be nice. It is, we find like about like a 50% retrieval rate depending on a lot of factors, including your realm. You know, if you're using, if you're working in a discipline that has lots of open access material versus not so many, those kinds of things. Okay. No, where did my slides go? Hold up. At the end of the presentation link, slides link, there is a link to some feedback. So if you are heading out, if you have a minute, click on that feedback survey. I think you also get it in an email once we're done. The note here about the EndNote drop-in Q&A, so it is on February 24th at noon. So if this was helpful, but you are gonna then spend a little bit of time over the next week setting up your library, that would be a great time to then just check in with a librarian and kind of see how things are going. If you have questions that I didn't answer because I'm a health librarian and you work in totally different databases, it would be probably useful for you to talk to your subject librarian. So that is a link there to the rest of us. And some things really are discipline specific. So that might be a good additional moment. And in that link that Maylin shared with the authentication details, there's also lots of information about sort of training and troubleshooting for all three of our citation managers.
Janet, maybe one more thing. Do you mind just sharing, since you've got the share screen, how you would share your library with another EndNote user? Yeah.
Yep, for sure. Okay, so there's two different options. You can share your whole library. So if the only reason you're using EndNote is to work with a group, you can share the whole thing. So that's under File, Share. I don't find this as common as sharing a group, so just one section, which I'll show you in just a sec. So this is the file share menu. Basically, you just throw in an email address. They do also need to have their EndNote license connected to a registered account, which is something that once you install your EndNote, it'll ask you to register and give it an email address. And that's also how you sync. You would log in with that information. You can give people read and write permission or read only, and you can add a message here when you're sending an invitation so that the person, you know, you might say this is for the scoliosis project or whatever. More common is sharing a group. So I do this a fair bit, and the groups at the bottom of my list are shared. It's not the whole library from Andrea and Hal, it's just one project that we work on together. So once you've got your group highlighted, you can click Share Group from the group menu at the top. But then it's the same process. You add people and invite them. If you already have a group, if you're already sharing with a group, the sort of stripy lines at the top will show you who you're sharing with and what kind of permission they have, and allow you to change their permissions. So say you're working with a student and for a while you want them to be able to make edits, and then maybe they finish their program and you don't want them to be able to do that, you can take their permissions away completely, or you could change it to a read only. Good question.
So there's no more questions that I have in the chat box for you.
Okay, well, it's 5:30. We're probably all ready to end our days. So thanks for coming, and thanks for being engaged and having questions, and hope to see some of you at future sessions. We will send a message when the recording is up on the YouTube, and you have access to that handout material for however long you need in Google. All right, have a good night, everyone.